Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Compliance versus Resilience. What's the difference and why does it matter? Today, I'll be your host. I'm Katie Watson, and it's great to have you with us. So if this is your first time joining one of our sessions, welcome. At Secon, we partner with organizations to cut through the noise in cybersecurity, bring clarity and confidence, and a more human way to help you stay secure in an always-on world. Today's conversation is something we feel very strongly about because whilst compliance has become the benchmark for many of us, we need to shift the focus away from check boxes and towards something that genuinely prepares us for disruption, resilience. Imagine the difference between slamming the brakes in a panic and, and instinctively avoiding a hazard altogether. That's the gap we're here to discuss and explore. So for this, we've teamed up with Vendifi, who are reimagining third-party risk management and reshaping how organizations build security into their vendor ecosystem. Together, we're going to explore why compliance isn't the finish line and maybe even a false sense of security. It's a false sense of security, how supply chain blind spots can become active threats, and some practical steps that you can start to take in your organization. I'm very excited to announce that we're joined by Bradley Gilden Hayes, co-founder of Vendifi, an industry veteran with decades of experience, and he has got so much good information to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Katie. And you nailed the surname. Well done.
Brilliant, thank you. And just before we hand over, some quick housekeeping. So the webinar is going to be about 45 minutes and we'll have a Q&A function at the end. There's going to be the opportunity to put questions in the chat throughout and we'll visit them at the end. If they're just in case we don't get a chance to visit your question, or like me, you think of a question half an hour after the webinar's ended, you can always email me, katie.watson@seconcyber.com, and I will get in touch with Bradley and he'll be able to answer your question that way. So without further ado, grab a drink, get comfy, and I'm going to hand over to Bradley to dive into compliance and resilience.
Thanks so much. Let's swap over to my slides. And there you go. So, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Compliance versus Resilience. What's the difference and why does it matter? I'm Bradley Goldenhays, co-founder of Vendifi, and thank you so much to Katie and Secon for having me. So yes, compliance versus resilience. How did I come up with this topic? Well, I've been in the cybersecurity space for almost 20 years now. Started a business back in South Africa, where I'm from, called GT Consult. We focused on enterprise collaboration software. And actually, when we first started, we wanted to start a cybersecurity business, but no one would pay us. And so we thought, the enterprise collaboration space is as good as it's going to be. And so we really started to focus on helping companies do collaboration. And then we started to work on the security around that. We started helping companies become ISO compliant. And as we went through the GRC nodes, we rolled out a cybersecurity arm, and we made a very similar version to what Vendifi is today, where we looked at third-party protection software. And so over the years, I've noticed how compliance is basically a baseline, but resilience is what companies who care about security really should be aiming for. And that's because there could be a false sense of illusion with governance. It can just be a tick box security scenario. So let's start with a scenario many of you will recognize. Once you've passed an audit and you've gone through every step and you get the green light from the auditors, does that mean you are secure? And if you've got all of your paperwork in place, if you've got your cybersecurity policies in a trust center, if you've completed all your due diligence questionnaires and all the mitigations have been applied to it and everything checks out, does that mean that you're completely protected? And just because you've passed the audit doesn't actually mean that you could be compliant. And that's what we're going to go through today. What is the difference between passing an audit and becoming resilient around a framework? And so this is today's reality. Supply chains are stitched together by dozens or hundreds of third-party relationships. The average medium-sized company has over 1,000 vendor relationships, each one of them potentially with a catastrophic impact to that business. And we'll jump through some of those. Not all your vendors have the same security standards as you. There are security standards across vendors, and certain frameworks are incorporating vendor security and vendor supply chain management across the board, but none of them are currently the same as you in that space, and some of them don't have to comply to the same standards as you do. Compliance is just one piece of the security puzzle. Yes, it is an important part, but we believe that it is a starting point. And finally, resilience is what matters when the worst happens. So what is it that your business does when a breach happens or when an incident occurs? So let's take you through today's objectives. We're going to understand where compliance frameworks stop and real risk begins. So by the end of the session, you'll understand exactly what I mean in the space. How to identify common third-party blind spots that attackers love to exploit, especially with some real-world scenarios. You're going to learn how to move from a reactive policy to a proactive resilience in building, as well as discover practical ways to stress test your vendor ecosystem. Now, I'm sure there will be some information around a number of different parts in your resilience guide. We have a toolkit that I'll make available towards the end of this webinar, and you can chat to Katie and get a copy for yourself. This webinar is slightly biased to the third-party protection side. We do have our own software around Vendifi that manages that. So just showing you my bias as I go through this presentation. So let's start with a quick overview of major compliance frameworks that are relevant to cybersecurity. And while we get started here, let's get a feel for the room. So Katie, if you can send out our first poll here, and we can all have a look at the questions in the poll, and so we can get an understanding of who's in the room and what kind of cybersecurity program you're currently running, or what kind of reliance on governance you currently need to comply with, so that we can get a good understanding. And so what we have at the moment is the key compliance frameworks that we'll be covering today, that a number of you will be familiar with. ISO 27001. So ISO 27001 is an information security management system, 114 controls across 14 categories, and it's a global standard. Many of us have worked in businesses that are ISO compliant, and this is definitely one that checks a lot of boxes. We've got the NIS2, which is, again, very familiar, EU Cybersecurity Essential Services, and it's been expanded, obviously, from NIS1, and it has a supply chain security focus. We have DORA, which is relatively new, released January this year, and this focuses on all European companies in a financial specific sector, as well as the providers that provide them with critical services. And so this is obviously highly focused in 5 different areas, one of them being vendor management, and you have to have a full vendor risk checklist, and you have to provide a number of contractual items that link specifically to the vendors and what they do for you, and you have to have a whole lifecycle management around it. So the DORA is actually the most resilient framework out there at the moment, and a lot of these key items that we'll be talking about will link back to DORA. But we've got, from the American side of things, the NIST CSF 2.0, which has got 6 core functions where they've added governance and into the whole aspect of it, which incorporates resilience. And it is flexible, and it has been around for over a year now. We have SOC 2 and SOC 3, which aren't really specific frameworks, but definitely a requirement from the on a lot of the American accounting associations, as well as in UK and Europe. And one is a fixed set in time, and the other is real time, such as the SOC 3. And then we have something new that will be coming into the UK let's say next quarter or the following quarter, the UK Cyber Resilience Act. And so this was released in the King's Speech last year, and the draft was released at 1st of April, so this month. And so we can see that this Resilience Act is coming to the UK and will apply to a number of MSPs as well as companies across the board. It's got quite a large scope. And so despite their differences, these frameworks share common elements. So we've got different types of common elements across them. So from risk assessment and management, you've got security policies and procedure, asset management and control, incident detection and response, governance and oversight, and regular assessment and improvement. All of these are similar in that space. And if we have a look at our responses, we can see here that everyone here might be using a number of different governance policies and frameworks that they need to comply to. So as each area goes, they will be focusing on different specifics around your specific department or your specific landscape within your division. So for finance, if you have credit card information and you process that, you'll have the DCI, PCSS compliance. If you're in financial markets, you have specific DORA requirements around that. All of these different frameworks will focus in on specific areas in your business. So that's why meeting compliance requirements and audits for many companies touches on completely different frameworks. And the reason why is everyone is trying to ensure some type of resilience by incorporating different frameworks. And so this gives us some compliance frameworks that do provide value, but are limited. And so the value compliance frameworks brings is it does establish a great baseline for security. That's the biggest step forward. Like that's what I believe is their purpose, because you want to have something that everyone has the same yardstick, everyone has the same measure, everyone knows that once they implement this specific framework, that's the same measurement for everyone else. So it does provide a structured approach, and it does work for everyone to be on the same baseline. It does obviously meet regulatory requirements because they are designed to do that. And it demonstrates a commitment by you and your business that you do want to implement security. So it facilitates the communication around that in forums such as this today. And that's the big value from these regulations. However, the value does have limitations. And the limitations are most of them are point in time assessments, which means that once you've done it, come back again next year and we'll do it again, which can create a big chasm just to pass the assessment when that time of year comes around. The other area is focus on documentation over effectiveness. So this is the same that we find quite often in the third-party space. Do you have a policy for X, Y, and Z? Yes, we do. And sometimes that's enough. But we don't actually jump into the policy. We don't actually work out whether that policy is still relevant, and if there's a tabletop exercise to take us through what actually happens in case we need to leverage that policy or utilize that policy. The other limitations are minimum standards versus optimal security. So whilst it's a baseline, it's great, guys, we need you here. That might just be enough for certain companies, but depending on how the criticality or the risk of that specific vendor or that specific company, the overall standard is usually the minimum. It's not what you can achieve. And the other big area is regulation takes a long time to be updated. What we're all looking out for the AI regulation and what can and can't be done at the moment. AI has been on the forefront of everyone's mind for at least a year. There are very limited documents and well-backed AI frameworks that we can use it today, if not any. And so they do lag behind. So it ends up giving you a false sense of security if you tell your business, we've passed this regulation, because whilst you have found a baseline, that baseline might have been superseded months ago. So that's a big limitation. And the final one from our side is it limits supply chain coverage. There aren't as many regulations that cover supply chain end to end. And so that is a big factor in regulation that we see on a daily basis. So jumping in, let's have a look at an environment that, or a company that has suffered a breach. The NHS had a ransomware attack in 2023. At the time, they had 100% passed all audits in their cybersecurity frameworks. However, they still were ransomware, and the supplier affected multiple London hospitals. Over 11,000 outpatient appointments and procedures were postponed, and organization was completely compliant with their frameworks. So what exactly happened there was the compliance didn't prevent the successful initial compromise. It didn't prevent the lateral movement through the systems. It didn't prevent the encryption and critical patient data, and it didn't prevent the external operation disruption. And so we can look at these situations and go, what could we have done better in this space? And each one of these was where the minimum was met in terms of compliance. That could have been taken a number of steps further to be more resilient, which would have stopped each one of those scenarios. Had they had a better initial compromise action where they were continuously monitoring and having a look at the analysis, they could have stopped it there. Had they monitored for specific lateral movement throughout their systems and changes in certain usage of certain systems from different users, they could have stopped it there. Had they noticed that encryption was happening and there was exfiltration happening, they could have stopped it there. The number of things that could have happened outside of the compliance. So one of the fundamental challenges is that threats evolve faster than compliance frameworks. And so what could happen from a dynamic nature of cyber threats is that the threat landscape evolves faster than the compliance framework. What we get for compliance for is what we've learned in the past and not what we can continue to foresee in the future. The compliance framework goes, we know this is a problem. Please make sure that you prepare for this. This is the control. These are the items that you need to monitor for. That doesn't help with resilience. It's just saying, if you see this happening, this is why, this is what you need to do. So attackers specifically will target compliance blind spots. They'll go, great, if this company is regulated and they follow these frameworks, this gives us a blueprint as to what they will definitely be covering. Therefore, anything that's not mentioned in here is probably a soft spot. Obviously, nothing protects from a zero-day vulnerability. 100% nothing protects from a zero-day vulnerability. However, there is mitigations that you can apply that if initial compromise has been made, where do they go from this point? How do they transverse or lateral move throughout the organization? You can slow down a zero-day and you can provide mitigation for all of the other parts of the attack framework. Nation states are growing, and their advanced persistent threats operate beyond conventional defenses. If a nation state has it out for you, they will get onto your environment. They will do everything that they need to do to cripple your environment. And you need to understand that there's not much you can do in that space if you are being targeted. And most businesses that are over a certain size have been. If we look at Sony back in the day, they were 100% targeted by North Korea. And with Sony's huge backing in terms of cybersecurity, they still were attacked. They were still taken down. However, not the entire network was taken down. Specific parts of the organization were targeted, and they did manage to departmentalize the attack as well as isolate exactly what the attackers were going after. In the world of AI and automation, the acceleration of attacks are becoming more sophisticated and at scale. I'm not sure if you noticed the other day, but Troy Hunt, the owner of Have I Been Pwned, one of the most famous kind of community leaders out there in the cybersecurity space, got pwned himself through a automated AI hack, which allowed attackers to get access to his MailChimp. So if you're a part of Have I Been Pwned notifications, you would have been notified that Have I Been Pwned had been pwned. Again, this was completely AI based. The entire attack was sophisticated enough for a seasoned vet to be compromised. So these are real dynamic kind of situations that most frameworks don't yet cover. The common blind spots in compliance-focused approaches. So let's examine 4 critical blind spots that often fail to address specific areas in compliance. So my slide is not 100% working here, so you're going to see number 2 of number 4 first. And so let's jump into number 2 first. So OT and IoT devices. These are often exempt from standard requirements. So there's quite a lot of a gap between what IoT devices need to be controlled by, as well as what access do they have to the network. There's an old wives' tale. I don't know if it is true or not, but I have seen it a number of times. I haven't been able to find any real sources to it, but it shows that back in 2015, there was a hack on a Vegas casino where they managed to hack a webcam and monitor the roulette table. And this roulette table would then, based on the spin and the ball spin, they would be able to get feedback from the camera, which would then feed back to one of the players, which would give them where the ball would land within 3 spaces on either side. So obviously these guys would wait for this, get that information, and then start stacking chips there. If you go back and look at other scenarios, no one would have ever thought that webcam that was monitoring a fishbowl or one of the aquariums would be used in that space. And it will be the same for a lot of companies. How do IoT devices have any impact on my infrastructure? And we've seen over time how botnets are created over IoT devices and how this can be spread to either be used as an attacking source or as a alternative method for initial access. So those aren't currently fully covered. There are a number of frameworks that do specifically focus on OT and IoT devices, more OT than IoT, but yet they are a big blind spot. We see third-party supply chain risk constantly. Like I said when we started, the average enterprise has over 1,000 third parties. These third parties have a number of different access, a different variety of access to your company's information and to your company's infrastructure. That's not the only part, though. A lot of third parties use their own third parties, which we'll call fourth and fifth parties or nth parties, and you need to have access as to who they are and what their security posture is. So when you've got specific compliance around know your third parties, it's not just the third party you give direct access to, it's what they give access to their environment. So it starts to become this Russian doll kind of experiment where you have to see each and every single one of those vendors and exactly what their risk brings to the table. And the vendor assessments rely on questionnaires, self-attestation. That's a long word that I should have actually practiced beforehand. Um, but at the end of the day, it comes down to working in getting questionnaires back from vendors that you are happy with their response without providing any evidence. DORA, however, does ask for evidence for all of the responses, but a number of the old frameworks do not ask for any of that evidence. The cloud configurations list, this is around misconfiguration. So if you look at a lot of the compliance frameworks, they ask for multi-factor authentication. They give best practices around a number of different areas. However, a misconfiguration or logic flaw is something that is increasingly growing because of the complexity between different cloud environments. And so this is a big blind spot that we often find uncovered during vulnerability assessments. And it comes down to the complexity of the different environments and trying to connect them up. It's kind of like back in the day where devs couldn't get something working, so they made the access anonymous because authentication was too difficult. These things are happening with cloud configurations. The big area, though, and still today, it has dropped from, I think it was 90 back before COVID in 2019 to now 82% of breaches have a human element, which means that security compliance does not equal security awareness. So if you're training your users and they're passing all the blocks, that doesn't completely mean that they are fully aware. And also, insider threats are difficult to detect. So there's two areas there that we can unpack in another webinar one day. But I believe that the insider threats that we currently have are expanding rapidly because it is whenever there's money on the table, the threat grows up. So if you have a look at the affiliate programs for ransomware, they are everywhere and widespread. If you haven't had a look at it yet, you can go check it out. I mean, Google it. It's really right there. But there's a site called ransomware.live. If you go have a look there, it will show you at least 8 new ransomware breaches daily. That's the minimum. That's the average minimum that goes through on that site on a daily basis. We currently monitor those sites on Vendifi and identify if one of your vendors have been breached. And it is a never-ending list of breaches. And a big factor is because of the insider threats selling that affiliate ransomware. So the slide directly compares the compliance mindset with the resilience mindset. So from a compliance point of view, you want to be meeting minimum requirements. You want point-in-time assessments. Do you have a policy for what you do with your data, what happens in this event, who has access to what? You've got extensive controls throughout the business for everything. It's documentation focused. So everything in the business has a policy, everything has a procedure, there's training. You can go and find anything at any point in time. And it's usually around a specific time of the year where that assessment is then completed. However, resilience in comparison is the ability to withstand attacks. So you know you're going to get hit. What happens when you get hit? And the continuous adaptation once you start to learn what happens from an attacker's mindset. And can you withstand an attack scenario when it happens? You can obviously, your controls exist, but what is the effectiveness of your controls? This was all the way back in the day when we first started these types of tabletops where we would ask, have you tested your backups? How long does it take for you to get back up and running if the server fails? We know we've got the backups, but have you ever tested them? That becomes the difference. The operational capability of your business needs to be identified as to what the document says. So this is what the document says. Can we test this out in a war room scenarios? Let's get everyone who is involved. Let's get them into a boardroom. Let's do a tabletop exercise and let's talk about who's responsible for this specific. How does this start? And see in the business who can respond. Going, yep, that's me. That's my division. We're going to do the following. We're going to then pass it on to that division. We're going to notify this division. We monitor X, Y, and Z. Can you take your entire business through that scenario? That's the difference between compliance and resilience. And then obviously continuous improvements. Identify if technology changes, identify if new threats emerge, and update the documentation as well as the plan. And so defining resilience in cybersecurity is the ability to prepare for, respond to, and recover from cyber threats. A lot of companies think that they will never ever get hit because they've spent the money on the firewalls, they've spent the money on a number of different policies, they've got the consultants in, they've done all the work, they think they'll never be hit. So they never take the action steps to get to understand whether or not after they will get hit, what's going to happen internally. The ability to prepare and respond to a cyber threat or a cyber incidents is the entire point of resilience. And that's what will keep you ahead of everyone else. So not only implementing the controls, but being able to identify what would happen in a scenario if it had to play out. Maintaining critical functions during and after a cyber incident. So yesterday we saw that Spain and Portugal and some parts of France ran out of power and they completely shut down. I had a little giggle because growing up in South Africa, especially over the last 10 years, we had different we grew up different. The first time power was cut, everyone didn't know what to do. Now it's a daily occurrence. If power goes off in South Africa, I can assure you that the South Africans on this call will say, "Oh, I've got my UPS, I've got my power, my solar, I've got my batteries, I've got my generators. Something's happening." Maintaining critical functions where other businesses and even countries do not have a clue when it comes to that resilience. Adapting to changing threats and evolving attack techniques. This is a big area that AI just screams from, and being able to adapt to this is difficult. So how do you do this? Well, I think the biggest area around adapting and changing threats to evolving different attack techniques is obviously having a look at the MITRE attack framework and seeing what else comes up and getting your very passionate and inspired vendors and internal staff to show you what those look like. Learning from incidents to strengthen future posture. So that's a big part of DORA as well. Sharing incidents, telling and informing and communicating exactly what happened, how specific attackers had a foothold, what their attack looked like, sharing those deep insights as to how it all happened. Those will give you specific breadcrumbs as to how to change your attack and your resilience program, and focusing on outcomes rather than just controls. So this is the control. Why is this control? Why specifically is this control in place, and what can we expect the control is trying to manage? And looking at it from that end will definitely ensure a better resilience. So while we're about to jump into the key components of cyber resilience, to make sure that everyone is still ready and rearing to go through these next 10 slides, let's have another poll. Our previous poll showcased that everyone in the business 80% of the room have a balanced mix of the above. So they have meeting compliance requirements and passing audits, they're managing specific business risks and building resilience, and customer requirements and contractual obligations. We're going to have a look at what is the primary driver. See, we've got another question that Katie's going to put out there in a second. And this specific question is around how confident you are in your cybersecurity posture and resilience for your critical third-party vendors. And so this one is, let's have a look and see what my vendors' cybersecurity is like and how you measure that. And so we're going to make sure that everyone is still keeping engaged. So jumping into, while we wait for the poll to fill out, we're going to look at something here called key components of cyber resilience. So let's break down the essential components of a resilient cyber security program. Number one, threat intelligence. This one should be a no-brainer. You should be proactively monitoring, understanding adversary TTPs, so tactics, techniques, and procedures. That's where I mentioned the MITRE attack, and examining actionable intelligence around that. So key components of cyber resilience. Number one, threat intelligence. Number two, incident response. What do you do in case of a breach or identifying an attack? A well-defined response plan. That's number one. That's everyone looks around, and if you can have everyone in your business, from the CEO to the CFO and everyone in between, could you tell me exactly what happens in an incident where I find ransomware on my machine? And everyone should be able to say, do the following. And that comes from a well-defined response plan. You can also have regular testing and exercises. Do tabletop exercises and have weekends where you actually complete a real life scenario. As well as everyone in the business has clear roles and responsibilities as to what they need to do during a incident response. Business continuity plans. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the ISO 22,301. That is a specific business incident response framework, and it basically outlines identifying your critical business processes and ensuring that they are protected over everything else in the business. So you identify what critical functions are in your business. If your business was going to go out of business, what are the first functions in the business that would stop working straight away to cause that? Having tested backup procedures, so not only making sure that your backups are running, that you are backing up a number of areas. If you do have high availability, have you tested it? Have you swapped over? Can you tell us how long that recovery time has taken? So the recovery time objectives, RTOs, what time from when you went down to when you were back up, what is that time? Is it possible that everyone's happy with that time? Is it business hours? Is it regular hours? Is it out of hours? What are those response times so that you can create some kind of measurement for your resilience? And finally, your organizational structure. Security is a responsibility of everyone in the business, and your executive leadership needs to be engaged around this. So you've got to continuously have a learning culture about how the cyber resilience works in your business, who is responsible in the business for specific roles, and create that culture internally. So I talked about measuring resilience, and one of the things that you want to be able to measure is how resilient your business is. If you can't measure it, how can you improve it? So how do we measure resilience? We do mean time to detect, MTTD, and mean time to respond, MTTR. So your recovery capability metrics, your threat simulation performance, your security control effectiveness, your third-party risk indicators, all of these will create some type of measurement. So your mean time to detect, how long does it take for you to detect a threat? And how long does it take for you to respond? You've got a lot of different responses here, different maturities in this group. But can you identify and detect a breach in your business? How long does that take? If that answer, you're uncomfortable with that answer, then it's probably a good time to add in additional controls and to figure out what a good baseline is for you. It's the same goes for how long it takes for you to respond. Your recovery capability metrics are quite easy. Shut down the system. How long does it take to get it going and get it back up again? That time, whatever you're uncomfortable with, and you want the business is uncomfortable with, how do you bring that back into a time frame that the business is comfortable with it, and therefore you can measure your resilience. Threat simulation. So, what happens when you send out a phishing campaign? Who clicks on it? What is the effect based on those people clicking on that campaign? If you send in a red team and they get access to your server room, shut everything down, how long does it take for you to get back up? How long did it take for you to detect it? Did you detect anything? All of these items you can create measurements for, from the time from detection to the time to respond to the time that it gets back up and running. Third party is a little bit more tricky, and we're going to jump into that in a second. So if we jump into the third party digital supply chain space and we focus on what I consider the most critical part, number one area is if you're looking at over 1,000 vendors on a daily basis, that becomes quite a daunting task. But it is important because 60% of organizations have experienced a breach caused by a third party. So that is a little bit terrifying, knowing that you have a 50-50 chance when you bring in a vendor that they might cause the breach. So you want to be quite clear that you are focused on their security controls as well. And so what is the biggest leading aspect to why supply chains are becoming critical? It's because digital transformation acceleration is third-party dependent. Not many companies can create everything from scratch and do everything in-house and not rely on any third parties. It's just too easy to get a $10 subscription and get something working and connect that to your environment, because it would take you far too long and it would remove any competitive advantage by doing it internally. So we rely on third parties, and third parties specifically specialize in those areas. The complex web of fourth and fifth party relationships can make some things interesting. A number of companies not only have been bought out, get sold out to other businesses. You might not even know who that company is being run by, what nation state is running that company, and where your data is sitting in that scenario. So understanding each one of those steps is completely difficult and complex. And so increasing regulatory focus on supply chain security has been growing over the years because of these specific areas. The topics such as the NIST SP 800 and 161, they've got a specific supply chain risk management practice. The OCC Bulletin, the 2013-29, as well as OCT Bulletin 2020-10, EU DORA Act has got specific third-party protection. ISO 27036 has information and security supplier relationship policies and controls. GDPR, which we all are familiar with, has a very specific third-party moving data to a third-party specific control. And there's the PCI DSS 4.0, which specifically is related to third-party managing financial data. So all of these regulations are now really focusing on the supply chain because of it's becoming such an attack vector. Why attackers love the third-party vectors? Well, from an attacker's perspective, third parties are often the path of least resistance. Your business might be hunky-dory, locked down. You are as resilient as you possibly can be. However, through the supply chain, it could find a much weaker third party that one can compromise. And because of that, you go for the path of least resistance. Smaller vendors usually have weaker security because they don't have the investment to pump in to the security. They have limited resources, and there's less scrutiny around them because they're most likely not regulated. So the amplification of the impact is larger, which means one compromise can hit many different customers, and attackers can do this island hopping. Once they jump on one vendor, then they can move to a number of other trusted connectors across the board. And so it is also a little bit more of a challenge to detect if a third party has been breached, because you've given that third party some type of trust and access to your environment. So in this case study, we can talk about the SolarWinds attack, which was devastating. For those of you that don't know, the Russian state-sponsored actors, the APT-29, also known as the Cozy Bear, added malicious code to the SolarWinds Orion software. And this was given out to about approximately 18,000 organizations on an update. So the entire supply chain was infected with a backdoor, and this backdoor gave access to 18,000 different companies, some of them being US government, treasury, state companies. So attackers had access to over 18,000 different suppliers through an update, and the update was provided by SolarWinds. And so that was a huge supply chain attack. We've also got the Cassia VSA ransomware attack in July 2021, and that was also a big watershed moment. The Russian-linked Revil cyber criminals created a 0-day, and essentially there was a VSA management software that most MSPs used, approximately 1,500 MSPs used through 17 different companies. Again, they were all attacked, and they were all had backdoored into the MSP's information, which would give them access to every single one of those MSP's clients. So they, again, big supply chain attack. People thought, wow, I'm completely safe here, big company taking care of things, and left that door wide open and didn't have any controls around that, didn't have any practice around that, and that left them in a very vulnerable position. And so we've got to be shifting the security mindset. So from compliance driven to risk driven. So no matter what happens in any way, shape, or form, what is the compliance asking for, and then what is the risk around that for us as internal, as vendors, as suppliers, as companies, and look at the business impact focus and become resilient around those specific areas. And so from periodic testing, once off, once a month, once off, once a year, to something more continuous, something that can check everything all the time, every month, every day, when everything changes, continuously checking and telling me if something has changed with an immediate alert, no matter when it is. What can I do about that alert, and what kind of automated systems can I then put that alert through? And from perimeter to zero trust. So not trust anything. There's the old saying, it was Ronald Reagan, trust but verify during the Cold War. This is don't trust but verify. Try get everything into a zero trust location, but always verify any information around that trust and identify based on identity. So make sure that only specific users can do specific items. Specific vendors can only have access to specific areas, and that is continuously monitored throughout the life cycle of that relationship. Ensure least privilege and continuous monitoring. The practical steps for building this proactive resilience is always a risk-based approach to any security investment. So always test what the risk is based on that. The threat modeling and scenario planning. So what can happen in this case? What do you think it would look like if this was a problem? And how can we ensure that we get everything back up and running in that scenario? You need to develop a security aware culture. Everyone in your company should be involved in how the business runs and what is critical in the business and what to do in a specific situation. You've got to leverage automation and orchestration. There are so many enhancements from so many different vendors out there that automate processes that currently I see a lot of businesses manually processing that just doesn't make sense in terms of time versus money. So leverage automation, look at AI agents, look at what vendors do in those spaces, and ensure that those are all orchestrated into one specific location so that you can see everything in one pane of glass. And measure the effectiveness beyond the compliance. Don't just go, cool, we've checked that box. Understand why the compliance was put in place for that, understand the risk, and ensure that you measure beyond that. Communicating security posture to stakeholders, everyone in the business. This is why we're protecting this. This is why we need to be conscious around everything that happens in this space and ensure that that communication happens freely and openly throughout the business. And so we see it in our business. The vendor questionnaires are one of the main parts of vendor recognition and identifying vendor risk. However, there is a huge limitation on vendor assessments simply because vendors can fill out their own questionnaires and they don't always need to provide evidence around that. It is a point in time validation. So it is just, this is what it is right now. Could change the second they send that. And it also is an optimistic self-assessment. They're going to probably lean to, yep, we probably have it, then actually we're not sure. And so you need to create specific tests and specific protocols to gain back the evidence for those answers. So you need to ensure that not only are they answering that information accurately by testing out certain scenarios, you need to ask for evidence, you need to verify that evidence, and you need to probe based on the evidence provided. This can be through vulnerability assessments, you can check breach notification services, you can do dark web monitoring for specific credentials popping up, you can do news and financial monitoring such as Google Alerts, simple Google Alert for your vendor, and these things will showcase a lot that would verify that vendor's information. So practical techniques for vendor stress testing, such as tabletop exercises. Have you ever had a tabletop exercise with your vendor? What happens in the scenario where this breaks, or who does what? What are the next steps? Can we go through this from step by step? Joint incident response drills. What happens when we're actually not going to do a tabletop today? We're actually going to do 100% a response drill. When this goes down, we need you to respond. We need this to happen and go through the entire process together. You've got penetration testing of your vendors as well as yourselves and making sure that each of those integration points are working, that they've been fully vetted, and you're validating the data that goes from them to yourselves. And supply chain mapping, identifying what fourth parties and fifth parties are connected to your third parties with a single point of failure. What happens in the case that this provider no longer is available? Do you need to bring in other providers? What do we do in these scenarios? And connecting all of that to a risk assessment. So, building a resilient vendor program. All of this, by the way, I'm going to give you in a toolkit, which you can get from Katie. I realize we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm speeding up. However, all of this is available in the toolkit. You've got a number of different areas that you fill out, and it will take you through where you are in your maturity. So when you're building out your vendor management program and your internal resilience program, you can identify where you are. Do you have risk-based vendor tiering? Do you have contractual requirements and SLAs? Are you monitoring those? Do you have collaborative security improvement with your vendors? Do you ask them to ensure that they upgrade their TLS and upgrade any of their encryption? Do you have any contingency planning for your vendors' failures in the case of anything breaking? And do you have regular assessments and relationships to evolve your continuous partnerships with each other? All of these will lead you to steps and controls to create a resilient internal cyber program. So the key takeaways today is compliance is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So if you feel like you got a good tap on the back for completing the latest audit, but are still worried, that's completely granted. It is something that everyone goes through. The compliance area is necessary, but it doesn't always leave sufficient space for protection, and that's why resilience is important. So resilience requires continuous adaptation and continuous change because the threat landscape is fluid and does change often. Third-party risk management is critical. It's no longer a nice to have, specifically around vendors that are connected to your environment. Proactive approaches yield better outcomes. Always being proactive will always bring a better outcome, not just, yep, that's good enough. What happens down the line? So real security leaders know compliance is just one piece of the puzzle. Resilience is what matters when the worst happens. So I've got some next steps for you. Assess your current resilience posture, identify and address critical blind spots, develop and test incident response plans, implement continuous monitoring, and build a resilient vendor management program. You can get the toolkit via emailing us. You can contact me through LinkedIn or via email. There is all of my information, and we only have a few minutes left for questions. Sorry, I get a little bit passionate when it comes to this.
Thank you so much, Brad. That was fantastic. There was so much knowledge, and it's brilliant that there's a toolkit afterwards. I've just done a quick poll. So if you do want to receive the toolkit, just let us know on that poll, and I will make sure to get it to you straight away. We only have a few minutes for questions. So if anyone does have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. Appreciate there was a lot covered in this. It was so informative, absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much, Brad. If you come up with a question later on, as I said, you can always drop us an email, get in touch with Brad. We're really happy to help. This is such a big thing in the industry. It's what we're seeing everywhere, the third-party breaches, and being able to support you in being more resilient is why we do this. So thank you so much everyone for attending. Thank you so much, Brad, for all of that information. And
My
yeah,
pleasure. Thanks, Katie.
no worries. That was absolutely fantastic. So it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment. Like I said, if you do think of any, please do feel free to get in touch. This webinar is part of our cybersecurity in focus series. So there will be another webinar coming up. The next one is on vulnerability remediation in the age of AI. And it does touch upon some of the things that Brad actually said that you should be looking to do. So you may find that interesting, and that will all be in the follow-up emails. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much.